Alright, welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part series of theories defending the claims in the Character Encyclopedia. This time, we're going to be covering the Crying Child and Foxy Bro from FNaF 4. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, please go ahead and do so before watching part 2, as parts of this video build off of points that I established in part 1, and without that context, some of the points that I make in this video won't end up making any sense. With that out of the way, I want to clear up a couple of mistakes that I made in part 1 before I get too far into the actual theories. First, I want to call attention to one of the claims I made about Henry, that being that he is away from the company between the original opening of Fredbear's and the opening of the FNaF 6 pizzeria. This was a mistake on my end. I forgot that Henry referred to the classic animatronics in his dialogue in Pizzeria Simulator, specifically in the Insanity ending when he says this:
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable."
Next up, I was wrong about Fredbear's color. I assumed that the Fredbear posters that we got with Security Breach were meant to course correct the coloration of Fredbear and make it more consistent. I did this by showing that you can get a color that is similar to the Fredbear poster by combining the color of the Stage 01 Fredbear and the Take Cake Bear. Afterwards, I realized that this is not accurate, as the Take Cake Bear was confirmed to be Freddy in one of the teasers for Pizzeria Simulator. Additionally, the cutout used to get the Brazil ending in Ruin is called 70s Freddy Ice Cream, credit to Reddit user CXSONN for the image. What does this mean? Freddy was there from the start. This whole time, we assumed that Freddy was added later on in the history of Fazbear Entertainment, but it would seem that Fredbear's had 3 animatronics, not counting the puppet who was a security robot. These 3 were Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, and Freddy. This has some implications, so I'm gonna save this line of thought for its own theory, but it has some major ramifications on the timeline. Now for the real topic of this video, FNaF 4. Like last time, I have to ask, please go into this with an open mind. I have plenty of points and evidence like last time, but the majority of everything I'm going to say from this point on flies directly against the fanbase's consensus on this game. So with that out of the way, let's kick this off with one of the easier points. Michael Afton is not who we play as during the night segments of FNaF 4. According to most versions of this theory that I've seen, many believe that Michael Afton is the older brother of the Crying Child. From this, they claim that the night sections of FNaF 4 depict Michael being tormented by his father for causing the death of his younger brother. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's start with why this is not what's happening during the night gameplay. Like last video, let's start with some of the weaker points and build our way up, this time starting with height and age. What do I mean by this? Well, if Michael is the Crying Child's brother, he'd be way too tall to be who we play as in FNaF 4. The height of the player is short enough for the bed to be a little shorter than their head, but for the doorknob to be a little above eye level. The Foxy Bro, on the other hand, is generally accepted to be aged somewhere between 12 and 17, with most believing him to be a teenager. While the hallucinogenic gas and didophobia makes Rory not realize his age, we can easily rule out the use of it in FNaF 4. FNaF 4 is a game that is all about listening for audio, and of all the various sounds that we hear in the game, we never hear a steady hiss like Rory describes. Adding on to this point, the Ultimate Guide even highlights the sounds to ignore and to listen for, with a constant hissing not being something mentioned on either list. Going even further than this, not only do we never hear the hiss that Rory mentions throughout the book, but the Nightmare animatronics have some distinct differences between FNaF 4 and Didophobia. First and foremost is their behavior. In FNaF 4, they are more than willing to attack you, with the game over screen being covered in blood. Compare this to Didophobia, where the most physical contact they make is when Nightmare Freddy bites Rory's wrist, something that despite its dramatic sound isn't even mentioned the following morning. As for their sounds, the Nightmares in Didophobia don't make many sounds other than their footsteps, with them not even making any breathing sounds. In fact, this is something that Didophobia specifically highlights, stating that the only sounds of breathing were the ones that came from Rory. Between the differences in how the Nightmare animatronics behave and the lack of any hissing sounds, it's clear that William isn't using the same tactics that he did in Didophobia during FNaF 4. While Afton does eventually use the Nightmare Gas, as we see in Didophobia, him not using it in FNaF 4 only leaves one trick left, the Sound Illusion Discs. While it's possible that Afton used these to make a teenage Michael feel small by causing everything to appear more imposing, this becomes much less likely when we see what other official sources have to say about who we play as. Starting with the game's official Steam page, we see the line, "Playing as a child whose role is yet unknown, you must safeguard yourself until 6 AM by watching the doors, as well as warding off unwanted creatures that may venture into your closet or onto the bed behind you." The Ultimate Guide doubles down on this idea with the line, "You're playing as a child, trying to ward off nightmare versions of the animatronics who are attacking you in your bedroom." While, admittedly, the wording of this sentence is a bit weird, this also claims that we are playing as a child, not a teenager. This goes from a hint to a deliberate confirmation in the Character Encyclopedia, where it's confirmed the Crying Child is the aforementioned kid that we play as. As for the Nightmare Fredbear drawing in the survival logbook, I have a solid explanation for this, but this is where the structure of the video will begin to get a little bit confusing. You see, to explain the existence of this drawing, I need to explain what is really happening in FNAF 4, and before I can even do that, we need to start with a breakdown of how exactly remnant seems to work. Remnant is a strange substance that is associated with memories and souls, as we can see in the games, the Silver Eyes trilogy, and the Fazbear Fright series. Sources on what exactly it is are a bit difficult to sort out, with the Ultimate Guide referring to it as soul energy. Meanwhile, a Fazbear Frights quote also found in the Ultimate Guide describes it this way. In non-scientific terms, it's like the metal's haunted. It's more complicated than that, of course, but it's similar to the way that water conducts electricity. Remnant is the mixing of the tangible with the intangible, of memory with the present. The people and things that are lost, it makes them almost real again. Given that we know that this story features literal ghosts aside from the remnant itself, it seems that the souls are capable of creating remnant, or as the Ultimate Guide called it, soul energy. Tying this into the Fazbear Frights quote, this soul energy is filled with the memories of its creator. Additionally, we know that remnant can be destroyed by fire, though we also know that the fire doesn't destroy the souls themselves. We know this since we have confirmation of at least 2 characters whose souls have survived being burned, those being William Afton and the one you should not have killed.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not going to let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
Interestingly, we also know that Remnant appears to act as a binding agent for souls. When a recently departed soul releases Remnant, it can attach a soul to an object if they come into contact with each other within an unclear window of time, explaining why Afton had to kill in order to harvest more. This also explains situations such as Charlie becoming the puppet after her death. While she died outside, when the puppet approached her dead body, the Remnant bound her soul to the robot. We also have another notable example of this window of time in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame. In the minigame, the children are shown to have already been killed by William Afton, but despite this, they are still able to possess the animatronics after the puppet places them inside. While I could easily continue to go on about the theoretical metaphysics of how Remnant and souls work in this series, I'll hold off and add it to my list of future video ideas. That said, before we continue, the only other thing that we need to establish about Remnant at the moment is that objects or people injected with Remnant can come to either experience memories from, or just generally become more attuned with the souls that created it. The most notable example of this comes from the Fourth Closet, when Carlton gains the ability to see the children's ghosts after William Afton injects Remnant into his heart. Another, albeit more debated, example comes from the Survival Logbook, where Michael Afton seemingly gets communicated with by an unclear number of spirits after being scooped and worn by Innard. So, how does this tie back into FNAF 4? Well, at the end of the game, a voice that is commonly believed to be William Afton tells the crying child that he will put him back together. Given that the crying child's room is completely different from the room that we play in at night, a room that we know to be real from Dedophobia, it seems clear that the actual gameplay of FNAF 4 takes place after the minigames, like we see in FNAF 3. Additionally, we know that William was working on humanoid robots in the sister location bunker from the animatronic heads that the Character Encyclopedia calls the human heads. With this all tied together, the hospital items that we see are likely glimpses of memories held by the crying child prior to his death, coming from the remnant injected into his rebuilt body. This explains these Easter eggs, while also explaining how the crying child would be who we play as, like the Character Encyclopedia says. That said, how would Afton have gotten the remnant from the crying child? Well, I'll admit, this part is going to be somewhat speculative, but let's look at the final cutscene of FNAF 4. In it, the crying child is surrounded by all of his toys, most notably the Fredbear plush. Given that we know that the crying child dies in the hospital, it seems very possible for his remnant to have attached to the plush. If this was the case, it would have been relatively easy for William Afton to take the plush and extract the remnant from it. Now, tying this back to Michael, we know that the scooper contains a remnant reservoir for holding the extracted remnant. We also know that Michael came into contact with remnant, both possessing his own body and interacting with spirits in the logbook like I mentioned before. If the crying child's remnant was injected into the new body by William Afton, it isn't impossible that there was some residual remnant mixed in with the amalgamation of remnant-infused metal that made up Innard. This would more than easily explain why Michael would have nightmares of the Nightmare animatronics, especially Nightmare Fredbear, the one that the crying child would likely have received the most trauma from. Now that we've established that we're playing as the crying child, it's on to what may be the largest piece of fan consensus in this franchise. The crying child is not the son of William Afton, and I have a surprising amount of evidence to back this claim up. Because this is a theory that covers both the Foxy Bro and the crying child, we'll start with the easier one, the crying child. Just like before, we're going to start with the weaker points and then work our way up. Starting off with some light circumstantial evidence, Scott isn't completely opposed to confirming fan theories, even those about characters' identities. Since Sister Location, Scott has both deconfirmed Mike Trap following MatPat's theory, and confirmed the Cassette Man in Pizzeria Simulator to be Henry in both the Ultimate Guide and the Character Encyclopedia. With that in mind, he did not confirm anything regarding the crying child being an Afton on his Character Encyclopedia page, nor did he even allude to it. Given that this theory has been circulating the fandom for years now, with many believing it to be canon, why would Scott repeatedly avoid confirming it if it's something that the community got right? This all being said, I specifically want to highlight the fact that the Ultimate Guide does not confirm this theory, as I've seen that misconception float around a few times. The section in the book that talks about this theory deliberately prefaces it with the phrase fan theories before breaking the theory down by each member involved. While this is a strange formatting choice, it is not Scott going from fan theories to a straight-up confirmation. Again, the fact that we are 2 years off from FNaF 4's 10th anniversary and this still hasn't been confirmed by Scott should be an interesting indicator. But again, that's circumstantial evidence rather than hard evidence, so let's move on to something more concrete: the crying child's sister. Many assume that the pigtail girl in FNaF 4 is both Elizabeth Afton and the crying child's sister. Now, we already went over how Elizabeth should already be dead by this point in the last video, but even aside from that, we know that this isn't his sister in general. When you talk to her, she says, "See you at the party," after talking about the rumors surrounding the restaurant. While a divorce is always possible, it feels strange for her to say that she'll see him at the party if she's his sister, as this implies she wouldn't just see him at their home. That said, we actually have a very solid candidate for the crying child's sister in the game: the girl playing with the toys. On a surface level, most would likely think that the evidence starts and ends at her playing with toys of the toy animatronics and there being a toy of Mangle in the girl's bedroom, but we can actually do better than that. When you look at the area she's in, the playground is very small, only featuring a swing set and a seesaw. However, if you look more closely, there is a wall touching the north fence that is the same color as the walls of the crying child's house. Additionally, if you compile all of the minigame locations together into a map, you see that this wall does in fact belong to the crying child's house. To take this just one step further, if we look at the fencing, it is the exact same fence that the crying child's house uses. This is notable, as we can see a darker fence on the corner sidewalk, the only other fence in the game. What does this mean? This isn't a playground, but rather a few outdoor toys in the yard of the crying child's house. When we look at all of this evidence together, this is most likely his sister playing with her toys in their yard. While this alone is pretty significant, we aren't done yet, as we need to return to the map of the area found in Sister Location. Most believe that William Afton is spying on his son with a Fredbear plush. However, we can see that his map of the crying child's house only shows 4 rooms: the crying child's bedroom, the living room, the clock room, and the sister's room, all areas that feature the Fredbear plush that watches the crying child. That said, we know the house is bigger than this, as the living room has a door to the left that implies the house has more rooms. With this in mind, why would William Afton not account for the rest of his own house? I find it hard to believe that the crying child is just banned from everywhere except for these 4 rooms, but the idea that these are the only rooms that he has surveillance on makes more sense. Additionally, it would explain why this is the only building on this map to not be directly connected to the Sister Location bunker, because it is the only building that William does not own. Now, this is a solid case for the crying child alone, but if he doesn't appear to be an Afton, we still also need to prove that his brother isn't one either, and there's a solid amount of evidence to back this up as well. One of the biggest pieces of evidence that people use to prove that Michael is the Foxy bro is the Fredbear drawing from the survival logbook, but since we already covered this point earlier in the video, we can move on to the next point. While we also already covered how the Ultimate Guide doesn't confirm the theory that the crying child and Foxy bro are Aftons, there is still one piece of information there that I would like to highlight. At the bottom of the fan theories section talking about this, it has a sticky note regarding the poster from Pizzeria Simulator. The note reads, "Further proof for this theory seemed to come from Pizzeria Simulator, where the rare screen of Lefty in the back alleyway shows an interesting poster." This alone is an interesting choice of words, specifically stating that it seemed in past tense, but this isn't the only time the book mentions this poster. On page 89, it states, "On Lefty's rare screen, you can spot a thin striped appendage, reminiscent of the puppet, poking out of his arm. A poster to the right depicts a puppet as well. Some fans suggest the poster behind Lefty represents William Afton and his children. William would be the elderly ventriloquist, Michael the talking dummy who resembles the old man, Elizabeth, believed to possess Circus Baby, is the clown, and the bear with the razor-sharp teeth is the third Afton child, considered by many to be the bite victim from FNaF 4. Aside from also not confirming this theory to be true, the line saying that the poster depicts a puppet as well is very interesting, as there's another way to interpret this poster that relates to it. You could easily interpret this to be referring to the four main antagonists of the game. The elderly ventriloquist would be William Afton, the puppet would be Lefty, as seemingly hinted at by the aforementioned line, the clown would be Baby, and the bear would be Molten Freddy. While this all explains some of the biggest points people have regarding this theory, we aren't done yet, as we also have some interesting circumstantial evidence regarding Michael not being the Foxy bro as well. We know that Michael went to get a sister from the bunker, but based on the evidence that we went over earlier, it makes sense for the crying child to have already been rebuilt for a while now. If the crying child is his brother, is rebuilt, and is in a location connected to the sister location bunker, why would he not be sent to bring him back as well? Given that most theories that claim the crying child to be a crucial part of the Afton family claim that William cared for the crying child enough to torment Michael after the bite of 83, why would he just leave him there? The easiest answer would simply be that he didn't do this because the crying child isn't his kid, but instead just a victim of his remnant experiments. As far as I know, the last major point left in favor of Mike Bro is the robot table found in Security Breach, and there are just a few things about it that I want to point out. Most people just accept that this is a depiction of the Afton family, but why? The robot at the head of the table, lightly resembling Ballora, is known as the Nanny Bot, and based on the name, it feels safe to assume that this robot represents a mother. That said, given all that we know about the Afton family, the mother was seemingly the least lore-relevant member. Depicting her as the head of the Afton family when we know literally nothing about her is already a strange choice. Continuing on, most claim that the server bot represents Michael Afton, but this doesn't make much sense either. Throughout the series, we see Michael Afton have around roughly 3 jobs, with only one being confirmed, these being a technician in Sister Location, a security guard in FNaF 3, and a store owner in Pizzeria Simulator. The server bot doesn't really match any of these roles, being closer to the job that an average pizzeria worker would have instead. Additionally, using a magician bot to represent William would be a strange choice, not due to any better fitting bots being available, but because that role fits Henry better than William. A magician is not a wizard. They don't use actual magic, they just perform illusions, something that is more commonly associated with Henry, who is even cited with creating the aptly named illusion discs in the Silver Eyes trilogy. Adding on to this, the appearance of the magician bot has more in common with Fredbear or Freddy than any type of Bonnie that we've ever seen, given the top hat and the bow tie. The only 2 robots that actually fit the roles people assign to them without much issue are the attendant bot, who clearly resembles Baby, and the headless bot, who seemingly represents the crying child. That said, I feel the need to mention how it's entirely possible for the attendant bot to be representing something other than just being a literal stand-in for Elizabeth. While the bot is clearly modeled after Circus Baby, like with the Nanny Bot, there is always the chance that it could just be representing the archetype of a sister in this context. That leaves us with the headless bot, and while the crying child isn't the only character in the series to have suffered a head injury, I do at least agree that this represents him. Regardless, with only 2 out of 5 of these making much sense, on top of all the other points against the crying child and Foxy Bro being Aftons, I don't think there is anywhere near enough evidence to confidently say that these robots represent the Aftons. While I normally do use the ultimate guide in these theories, it's not without its flaws. I bring this up because of a mistake made by the book in the FNaF 1 theory section that talks about Mike Schmidt, saying, fans have also pointed out that he shares a first name with Mike from FNaF 4, who seems to be Michael Afton, and Mike, the owner of the survival logbook. I've seen some people online wonder if this confirms that the brother in FNaF 4 is Michael, but we can easily break down that this is in fact a typo. Aside from the obvious fact that the name Mike never appears in FNaF 4, it says that fans have also pointed out, but when looking this up, the response to this claim by fans was confusion at what the book was even talking about. The Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Fandom Wiki even refers to this line, stating, in the Ultimate Guide in the FNaF 1 section, it mentions a Mike from FNaF 4 with no context given. That said, looking at the language used when stating that this Mike seems to be Michael Afton, it correlates well with the language used in the sister location part of the book that talks about Michael. Specifically, under a section labeled Michael Afton, there is a bullet point talking about aliases that reads, fans use the fact that Michael goes by Mike in sister location to link him to the guard Mike Schmidt from FNaF. This section again refers to what fans think, though it makes significantly more sense this time around. Just in case that wasn't enough, however, even the FNaF 4 section of this same book fails to mention anyone named Mike or Michael appearing in the game. All evidence points to the idea that when writing the book, they meant to type sister location but mistakenly wrote FNaF 4. And I'll call it there for now. I want to toss a little bit extra on this video to celebrate hitting 100 subscribers, notably what happened to the Crying Child after FNaF 4 ends, but it's not quite ready yet and is something that could easily be its own standalone video. Before I go, I want to say thanks for the support on that last theory though. I did not expect it to gain traction like it did. Part 3 will be coming in the relative near future, sometime this year, and will likely be a decent bit shorter than these last two theories, as it mostly just goes over some of the more interesting implications from the Character Encyclopedia. That said, I do have a few major theories coming up relatively soon as well, such as who owns Fazbear LLC, and a theory that explains almost every single question about Golden Freddy, ranging from Cassidy to Yendo. Subscribe if you want to be notified when these come out, as I've come to conclusions that I haven't seen anyone else come to. But anyways, that's gonna be all for now. I'll see you next time.